We understand that it's really important to have a flexible and adaptable technology stack, but that is underpinned by knowing where everything is. And so I'm really pleased to welcome Akhil Bhaskar to share some of his experiences with managing that stack and how it really enables the innovation and adaptability of companies. So welcome, Akhil.
Thanks, John. Nice to be here.
So Akhil, we've known each other for a little while. Currently you're at AWS, but you've also had a number of other roles in different countries, in the US, Australia, yes. Singapore. One of the things that I think is very top of mind is there is a lot of excitement about digitalization. And of course, since the pandemic, every company has had to have a digital presence. Not every company has everything in order. They digitize very quickly, perhaps, and is still resolving some of those challenges. And some of those played out in well-known outages, security vulnerabilities, cyber hacking. Can you perhaps share some of your experiences with what it actually takes to manage your stack well, so that you can have that adaptability and flexibility that you need?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. It's always nice to see you, and for once we're in the same city, which is always great as well. I think before I jump into a couple of examples of what I've done and where I've done it and where I think I've done it well with my teams is a bit of my background as well. So yes, I've worked across multiple countries in various industries. But I think the thing that makes me who I am is that I've moved from, currently I'm in a vendor land, if you will, but I've been in customer land, I've been in consulting previously, supporting customers across the world, understand what does digital transformation mean. And it's not just, here's the latest and greatest cool technology, although we love that because we are all techies at heart, but it is about how do you apply it to the problems that are real and how do you come up with solutions that are not just short-term wins, but sustainable long-term success. So underpinning everything I do is really just mental models and frameworks, right? And that I think is the crux of what you're talking about here as well, which is how do you think about systems and how do you think about understanding what do I have, where do I have it, who's doing what with it, and so forth. Look, I'll give you a clear example. When was it? It was like 2019, 2020, somewhere thereabouts. There was a big Log4j supply chain vulnerability that came through. And Log4j, for those that are Java users, it's a fundamental piece of technology, right? It's one of those libraries that everyone uses and has been using for 20 plus years, maybe even longer. I've been using it for 20 plus years. And so every single Java application has Log4j in it. Now, this is where supply chain issues come into play, where suddenly this Log4j, a certain set of versions were affected. And unfortunately, we were using one of those versions that was affected as well. Now, everyone's screaming around, the sky is falling situation. But luckily, we had a weapon at our disposal that we had not even planned for, coming to our aid at this point.
This is the software catalog.
This is the software catalog. We were using a technology called Backstage, which I think you're quite familiar with as well. And using Backstage, all I wanted to do was to understand, what were we building, where were we building it, and how could we make things go faster, right? So it was, for those that don't know Backstage, it's a way to understand your entire software catalog, but it also gives you things like templates and golden paths. So you can go in very quickly and say, I want to build a new microservice or a micro front end or a whatever it might be. Click a button, it starts up a scaffold, and then you build on top of it. But the scaffold gives you a lot of the goodness that you need, but also it gives me, as a manager, as an engineering leader, a lot of goodness that developers usually don't think about, right? Tag, explainable, documentation, understanding, who the authors are, what libraries are being used, and so forth.
So this is really two things, though.
Yeah.
The software catalog is a way of helping you to manage the assets, and I guess I'm impressed that not only you had a software catalog of your own assets, but also the dependencies on external software, the software supply chain. Yes. But the other part of what you mentioned with the scaffolding templates is it helps to encourage the use of the organization's style guide and patterns rather than developers coming along using what they used at their last company or looked on the web and thought that's really nice, which creates, not that it's necessarily bad practices, but if it's not a common practice within your organization, then it's very confusing for other people who need to work on that application.
So AWS has this thing where we talk about undifferentiated heavy lifting, and I didn't know that term until I joined a few years ago, but I think everyone kind of understands a bit of that term, right? So it's what are the things that I don't need to worry about in order to do the things that I do need to worry about, right? The things I get paid to do. Now in this company, we had a core group of full-time staff, developers, but we also had augmented ourselves with a ton of contractors. Now, in order to make the contractors whose time is valuable and where we're paying pretty decent rates, in order to make sure that their time is being utilized as efficiently as possible, or at least in my realm, we put in a lot of these patterns, to use your word, but just opinionated aspects of how should you do certain things, right? So we had chosen the language, we'd chosen certain libraries, we'd chosen a style guide, we'd chosen, the GitOps path and so forth. So everything's kind of built in. All they have to do is build the logic that sits inside of it. Now, I talked about the libraries. Honestly, that was a little bit of, we just wanted the information, but also we kind of got lucky, to be honest. Because in that set of libraries, and again, this was just pulled from, we were using Maven at this point, right? So Maven has a list of libraries. So we just kind of pull it and just write it down somewhere. And that somewhere then feeds into Backstage, right? It's a configuration file that leads into Backstage. Now, when the Log4j issue happened, and we knew that a certain library version was affected, all I had to do was go to my catalog and just search for anywhere where that Log4j version existed. So remember I said Q, everything's, we don't know what to do, and we have to now spend
management
hours
asking, how are we exposed?
In fact, our CIO did come and say, how bad is it, right? And honestly, it took us 2 hours, right? We did an entire review. We validated that the information was correct, because again, I didn't want to just trust one configuration file. So we went back in, just made sure our catalog was showing the right information. And we took that to the CIO and said there are 10 components that were affected, 2 that were already being fixed, and 8 that were on the to-do list. And effectively, I told our CIO, give us a day, everything will be patched. We'll be up and running through all the testing, everything else. We were done in about 4 hours, honestly. So a thing that could have blown up to be something quite complicated, something quite bad, turned into a situation where having had the rigor and the hygiene of maintaining, what do we have, where do we have it, how do we have it, came in extremely handy for us.
The word hygiene, I think, is very apt there, because when you think about cleaning up, keeping your house in order, that's a key part of that.
Absolutely is, yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of it, right? Again, from my consulting days, we usually got brought in when things were going pear-shaped or when we had to build something very large. And because we were consultants, we had to showcase every week, here's what we've done, here's the progress and so forth. I think that's kind of it's just inbuilt in me at this point, right? The habit of hygiene. I fundamentally think that is up for success in these scenarios.
So from doing the housekeeping and making sure that you understand your supply chain, those sorts of incidents, whether it's a security vulnerability or an outage, whether it was caused on your estate or one of your providers, it's important to understand what your options are, where your vulnerabilities are, and prioritize action. The next, everybody's talking about what AI can do for people, but what I'm conscious of, apart from the business applications, is how do you make sure that you're still in control of the key aspects of your business, and that you innovate, but you do so in a way that you know that you can sustain over time. So what are you seeing? now.
That's a big topic, right? And of course, everyone talks about AI at this point.
We talk about probably the biases, governance, and things like that. But from a technology estate standpoint, where do you see the need for firms to? How do you amplify that? Do you take Backstage and extend it, or what else? What else do you need to do?
So I'm actually a big fan of it. In fact, a small team and I are actually building out Backstage, but for Agentic AI. Now, before we go into Agentic AI, just generative AI has created this incredible wave of excitement and optimism. And like even my mother is a big Gen AI user and so forth. So it's just been this really interesting and really quite a step change in how we think about tech, right? But generative AI, the part that makes it really cool is the hallucinations, right, or the generative part. But that's the same.
The creative part of it.
It's very creative. So right when I write something with it, it's wow, that's amazing, right? But it's that same generative or hallucinative or creative part that creates problems for businesses, because businesses want predictability. Businesses want confidence and control. And when I ask this question, I want some sort of deterministic answer, not a probabilistic answer. And the entire point of generative AI is it's probabilistic, right? Now, if you shift that over to Agentic AI, this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because Agentic AI, in a very rudimentary way, you can think of it as microservices plus, right? Because it is about modular programming, it is about domain orientation, it is about how do you carve out certain parts of your workflow and you assign it to various different agents. Now, Agentic has been around since the 1950s, I think it has been. But what's changed now is instead of having to code everything, explicitly, or to put some sort of neural engine in it, or to have a business rules engine in it, I can now give it a 3-line English language statement, and it goes and figures it all out, right? That's the cool part of what's changed. But you still need to understand, as part of the agency that an agent has, as part of the autonomy that the agent has, what is it doing? And where is it going? And is it allowed to go there? Is it allowed to check out this information?
What are the boundaries?
Boundaries are incredibly important, and there's a knowledge boundary, a resource boundary, a tool boundary. There's a number of different boundaries to think about. And not only do you need guardrails, but you also need, especially for regulated environments like banks and telcos and governments, you need to be able to show what did the agent do, why did it do it, and what was the result out of it, right? So the explainability comes back into play, but ultimately all of that goes back to I need a software catalog. I need to know what the agents are. I need to know the boundaries of them, right? You get back to this idea of give me a list of things that I have and have access to. And that list can change dynamically. That's okay. But every time I add a new agent that I'm going to a marketplace and picking up, I add it to my list, right? So that's the part I think we haven't quite nailed down yet as an industry. But we need to, because that comes back to hygiene.
One of the things that's made documentation and the compiling of all this information a real challenge is it has been a lot of manual work. Now, tools like Backstage to feed the software catalog have improved things a little bit because you can tap into the GitLab or GitHub organization, and when changes are made there, it can feed through, there's a feed through to the software catalog. What do you see that change process happening in the agentic world? I mean, because you can spend, if documentation is an afterthought, then it will always be behind.
Sure.
The advantage of a Git-based repository for software is that that's the active working space.
Yeah.
So how do we maintain that
I think a fundamental shift here is we've gone from programmatic work, right? So I need to build these if-then loops and whatever the logic is, to what I'm calling intent-based development, right? So I give an agent an intent. and it then has to go figure out what it's doing. The moment you go to intent-based development, and you could do this in a way in traditional programming as well, right? I have an intention to build an app that I can sell on a marketplace, or it's a module that I put into an API library, or whatever the case might be. What we didn't do before, because it was kind of annoying, right? And I've worked my way into understanding why documentation is important, but that doesn't mean I like it, right? But the moment you have an intent, AI, whether it's a foundation model or some other type of system, can actually go through and figure out, what is this system doing? What does it need to do? What inputs and outputs and parameters does it need? And I think now it can go and write a lot of the documentation for you. That does not absolve the human from forgetting about it. The human still has to go check it, make sure it's correct, right? The same way they would check the output and go, is 2 by 2 coming out to be 4, or that's fundamentally wrong, right? So it's the same way the human still has a responsibility, but a lot of the undifferentiated heavy lifting can now be outsourced to these agents.
In terms of skills, that raises a challenge. Obviously, there's a new skill to learn, is how to manage the agent. Also, there have been some other changes, like we don't necessarily need to use all the tools we used to use, but we still need to retain some knowledge of some things. So, for example, my father was an accountant. He knew how to use a slide rule. I've never used a slide rule, never needed to, because we had calculators when I was in school. But the reason in primary school we still teach children the times table is because you need to be able to do that mental check, at least an order of magnitude check, that you're plugging in the right numbers to the calculator. What are the skills, how do you see skills evolving in this world where not everybody's necessarily going to learn some of the foundational...
And I think that would be a very unfortunate situation if that is the case. You're right in that we still teach the times table, right? Is there a need for it? No. Like, we just whip out our phones now and calculator app. Previously it was the actual calculator and so forth. But I think fundamentally moving forward, and I talk to my teams about this all the time, and they tell me about this as well, which is, I think there are 2 skills that are critical: storytelling and critical thinking. I'll give you a reason, even though they sound nothing like technology or software oriented. Storytelling is really important because that's how you communicate. And communication becomes super important when it's an intent-driven programming-based model. If you just say, go build me an app, right? I mean, the thing's going to spit out an app. Is it the app you want? Not at all. But if you say, hey, I want to build a calculator app where I give it 2 entries, and here are the 4 types of calculations you can do to it, and when I come up with that, like, if you don't know the answer, if you don't feel confident, go build a Python compiler and run it there, and then come back with an answer, right? Now, obviously, that's a very simple example.
When you said storytelling, I was thinking, yes, as people, we need to tell stories to each other. But you're talking about telling story to the agent who's going to build something for you.
But I think human-to-human storytelling, that's a whole different topic. I love that topic, and maybe we can talk about that again at a later point. In the context of programming, I think storytelling is still critical, right? Because you have to communicate often in an English language, or if you're using a model that can take in a different language, you need to be crisp and clear, right? Now, if you think about the history of software programming, how often have you been there before? Like, how often do you get requirements that you're like, I understand exactly what I need to do, right? We've not been good at this, right? And in fact, if we go into agentic AI, we need to fundamentally get better at telling the system what is it we want to do. Now, we won't necessarily get it right the first time, also because we might just not know what it is that we want the first time. This is where the second part comes in, which is critical thinking. And again, human beings need to develop and continue to develop critical thinking, and there's an entirely different human side of it. In the programming side of it, it comes back to feedback loops and iterations, right? I see a thing. I need to know what was my original intent? What does good look like? because the machine is going to be very happy to give you 50,000 iterations. You as a human, as the owner of that outcome, you have to decide which one of those is correct and when you are happy with it, right? And when do you go, that's good, let me now, push this change into my Git repo and have my GitOps process take over to do CD effectively, right? So those two skills for me are the fundamental skills. Beyond knowing base programming, I think you still need to know a little bit of that, just logic. But look, I was building something in Rust the other day, no understanding of Rust at all, right? But I had my Go script and I said, I want to convert this to Rust, right? And we have a thing called Kiro here, and I just put it into Kiro and I said, help me convert this to Rust. And it took me through it. Was it the maybe not? I don't know enough to know about it, but I built a working app in Rust that I could put in my POC environment. Wouldn't trust to put it into production yet, but I think those skills are still useful. But for me, it comes back to, can you tell the system what it is you want in a clear, succinct way? And then when it gives you something back, can you verify that this is the thing that you wanted out of it? And if it's not, rinse and repeat, right? Loops.
Akhil, I think you've summed this up extremely well. Always a pleasure talking with you.
It is always.
Thanks very much for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John. Cheers.